In the world of metal, where piercing screams and crushing riffs are commonplace, James Hetfield stands out as a living contradiction. In addition to being the charismatic leader and face of Metallica, the band that helped define a whole generation of thrash metal, he is also a young man consumed by rage, a father who abandoned him, a mother who passed away from a disease she refused to cure, and a guy permanently scarred by childhood trauma. He is an unbridled beast on stage, with a guitar pounding every rhythm like a hammer blow and a roar like a jet engine that sends tens of thousands of spectators into a headbanging frenzy. However, there is another James Hetfield out there, one who drank himself into intoxication and whose marriage ended after more than 20 years. And whose life came perilously close to ending in suicide. Hetfield has been at the top for more than 40 years, demonstrating the harsh price of celebrity while also serving as a living example of pure willpower. Even after all of the fame and the cries that fill stadiums, a guy is still struggling with the demons of his past and his addiction. His trip is still plagued by one question. And what aspects of James Hetfield has he been compelled to give up for musical immortality? James Allen Hetfield was born on August 3, 1963, in the seemingly peaceful suburb of Downey, California, but there were secret tragedies and simmering conflicts inside the humble Hetfield home. His father, Virgil Hetfield, drove a truck and traveled all throughout the United States. Because of his father's incessant absences, James remembered him as a distant, transient visitor. On the other hand, his mother, Cynthia Bassett, chose to become an artist. She provided James with his first emotional connection to music as a semi-professional opera soprano. James hardly felt the warmth of the family until she sang in the living room one evening. The first seeds of artistic talent were sown in his soul by them. However, there was a severe hurdle that accompanied that passion of music. Modern medicine was viewed as a rejection of faith by his parents, who were ardent adherents of Christian Science, a strict religion that held that all illnesses could be treated with prayer and dedication. Hospitals, medications, and even doctor visits were prohibited in the home. In the eyes of a child like James, it was an invisible jail. At school, the distinctions were much more obvious. James was slender and reserved, so he frequently had to miss physical education classes, doctor's appointments, or classmates' participation in sports. Whenever he was ill or hurt, his mother would mutter prayers while he sat motionless without receiving any medical attention. During those years, he experienced loneliness at a young age. He felt abandoned in a society that he should have been a part of. He was filled with a strange rage. Why could he be confined by rules that no one else understood, while everyone else in the world lived their lives normally? Then the actual catastrophe occurred. James' father, Virgil, abandoned him and his mother when he was 13 years old in 1976. 3 years later, he suffered yet another heartbreaking blow before he could move past that absence. Cynthia passed away from cancer in 1979, a condition she refused to cure, choosing instead to submit to God's will. James lost both of his parents within a few years when he was just 16 years old. His family had been destroyed. He moved in with his half-brother after gathering his meager possessions. That was the painful and tragic conclusion to his brief childhood. These gloomy days were what initially stoked James's anger. James started exploring in the space where his brother had previously left a library of old recordings, a piano, and drums. Before deciding on the guitar, which would become his lifelong weapon, he experimented with the drums, piano, and guitar. On long, lonely nights, the teen would listen to Motorhead, Led Zeppelin, and Black Sabbath. Then stumble over chords, allowing riffs to overpower the sorrow and the boom of powerful music to take the place of the choked sobs in his heart. This early life not only left him with psychological wounds, but it also served as the foundation for his future career. Songs about treachery, grief, and desertion. In the case of Metallica, these were no coincidences. They evoked a James Hetfield who, as a youth, had come to terms with death and loneliness. Before James could ever experience what it was like to be a child, he was compelled to grow up in darkness. The guitar became James Hetfield's only friend during those roving days in his half-brother's empty chamber. He never received formal music instruction. He played spontaneously, as though each note were a punch that let out all of his bottled-up anger. In an attempt to establish a sense of belonging that his family never provided, he soon sought out like-minded acquaintances and joined a few high school bands, such as Leather Charm and Obsession, in addition to performing on small school stages. By the late 1970s, social unrest and economic turmoil were still plaguing America. Many young people saw their future as either entering the factory or finding solace in drugs, music, or meaningless travels. Music was James's choice. And that decision marked a pivotal moment in his life. While browsing the recycler's Los Angeles ads in October 1981, James came across an advertisement from a young Danish drummer named Lars Ulrich seeking players to form a metal band. Their encounter was like a lightning strike after James responded. One was a lonely, angry, impoverished child. An affluent teen who had given up a promising tennis career to pursue rock was the other. They were very different on paper. However, when James's guitar struck, Lars's thumping drums in his little garage, an odd resonance was produced. Metallica's seed was sown at that very moment. The initial lineup was a little sketchy. In order to join the band, James, Lars, guitarist Dave Mustaine, and the talented bassist Cliff Burton had to agree to go to San Francisco, where an underground metal culture was developing. There was no hesitation. They traded the glitz and glamour of Los Angeles for countless nights of practice and performances in small clubs, moving to the Bay Area, renting frigid houses, living off of instant noodles, and sleeping on floors. Metallica's initial performances were dull. There weren't many people in the audience, and occasionally they left midway. However, a neglected generation of young people who required a musical expression of their anger and alienation started to be reached by their speed, rage, and vicious sound. After being abandoned, James Hetfield now stood in front of the microphone and screamed out all he had internalized. Over time, those cries evolved from being solely his to becoming the voice of an entire generation. But that ambition led to anarchy. The band was shattered by disputes and careless youth during those initial months. Dave Mustaine drowned himself in violence and booze. He was a gifted guitarist with a ferocious personality. He frequently arrived inebriated to rehearsals, got into arguments with his colleagues, and even got into fights while on tour. Seeing Mustaine's loss of control, Hetfield, who drinks a lot himself, knew the band couldn't last with such a ticking time bomb. It was a brutal but necessary decision for Metallica to terminate Mustaine in April 1983, only months before recording. They asked Kirk Hammett, Exodus guitarist, to fill in right away. Kirk was the band's ideal member, young, composed, and technically adept. The shift soon turned out to be correct. Megaforce Records provided Metallica with a little budget to record their debut album, Kill 'Em All, that same year. The music was a hit, faster than punk, heavier than Black Sabbath, and more angry than anything else playing on the radio at the time. For a whole generation, Kill 'Em All is considered the birthplace of thrash metal, a brand new genre. In just one summer, Metallica became cult icons because to the album's dissemination through bootleg cassettes and underground societies, while being disregarded by radio and MTV. They made a more confident return to the studio in 1984 and put Ride the Lightning out. If the ferocious manifesto of youth was Kill 'Em All, then Ride the Lightning demonstrated that Metallica could mature without losing their destructive power. The fear of death, the death penalty, and conflict were all addressed in the record. Complex concepts that go well beyond amusement. Although the sound remained storm-like, Hetfield and his bandmates added melodic depth, intricate patterns, and eerie silences for the first time. Metal music opened new avenues as critics started to view Metallica as genuine musicians rather than just a group of rebels. Master of Puppets, 1986, released 2 years later, marked a new high for Metallica. The album was praised as a thrash metal masterpiece. Each song was a dagger, with a razor-sharp style and a disturbing message about drugs, war, deception, and the cost of freedom. Not only did Master of Puppets establish Metallica as the dominant band of the 1980s metal era, it was hailed by the media as the best metal album ever. In just 3 albums, the formerly ravenous Wanderers had risen to international fame and were selling out venues all over the world. Tragic events, however, ripped everything apart before the grandeur could completely set in. Having just released Master of Puppets, Metallica set off on their most significant European tour to date in September 1986. As their bus raced across Sweden's freezing countryside in the early hours of September 27, it abruptly went off the road. The car flipped over many times during the confusion, smashing the glass. Instruments and people were hurled into the freezing, oppressive darkness with violence. Kirk Hammett, Lars Ulrich, and James Hetfield emerged from the debris stumbling, bruised and cut. They were miraculously alive. Not so fortunate, however, was 24-year-old bass prodigy Cliff Burton. He was flung through a window during the collision, and the bus fell on top of him, quickly crushing his body and taking all of his dreams and his creations with it. Cliff's passing was a direct hit to Metallica's emotions. James Hetfield didn't cry because of it. He let out a shriek. Desperate to find the black ice patch that the driver said caused the accident, he went for kilometers along the slippery road in anger and despair. However, he discovered nothing except powerlessness and emptiness. James, who believed Cliff had died from sheer negligence, even threatened to kill the driver. It was the insanity of a guy who had just lost the most important aspect of his soul, not just rage. For years, James was plagued by the agony, which never went away. Rather than grieving or confronting it directly, he resorted to drinking. His memories were wiped out night after night by the medication that was vodka bottles. The alcohol allowed him to forget, but it also clouded his judgment, making him a snappy, irate man. Cliff left behind Metallica, but the family was never the same. A few months later, the band brought on Jason Newsted to try to fill the irreplaceable gap. Jason had the passion of someone willing to sacrifice everything because he was young, gifted, and ready to prove himself. However, he encountered icy isolation right away. Hazing was referred to as an initiation ceremony. In actuality, there was a lengthy bullying chain. Jason's opinions were disregarded and he was not included in the composition process. The record was even worse. Additionally, his bass lines were purposefully lowered to nearly inaudible levels on Justice for All, 1988. He played with all of his heart on stage, yet his existence was all but erased on the record. As Metallica's popularity soared, selling millions of records and packing stadiums, a silent rift developed inside the band. Jason was pushed to the sidelines, and James Hetfield unintentionally widened the gap by getting more drunk and angry instead of keeping the group together. Metallica continued to push forward despite the painful years of internal conflict and loss. And Justice for All was published in 1988. Lyrics that delve into issues of justice, conflict, and the corruption of authority in a dense, technically challenging record. It was an enormous creative leap that demonstrated Metallica's ability to be more than just a band known for their rebellious music. The absence of Cliff Burton, however, was brutally apparent. Because Jason Newsted purposefully lowered his bass so low that it was nearly inaudible, the record sounded like music devoid of its essence. It received acclaim for its aspirations but criticism for being fundamentally flawed. That everything changed in 1991. Not all of Metallica's problems were resolved when they released their self-titled record, also referred to as the Black Record. They changed the course of music history. Enter Sandman, The Unforgiven, and the timeless ballad Nothing Else Matters are just a few of the shorter, more approachable songs that helped Metallica take off on MTV and radio. They became a worldwide superstar after the record sold over 16 million copies in the United States alone. They became the first metal band to captivate millions of mainstream fans with their intense sound, won Grammys, and dominated the charts. With his dominating presence and thunderous voice, James Hetfield was formally acknowledged as one of the most potent frontmen in rock history. However, fame has a terrible side. Some ardent fans, who had previously treasured Kill 'Em All bootleg tapes, abandoned the band. Metallica was accused of selling out and sacrificing its raw thrash ethos in order to pursue popularity and financial gain. However, the majority perceived a band that had reached maturity, finding a balance between broad appeal and artistic merit. That precise difference was what made Metallica special. They were simultaneously adored and reviled with equal fervor. And they were plunged into tragedy once more by fate. James Hetfield caught fire on stage during a pyrotechnics accident in August 1992 while performing in Montreal. The front of his body and his arm were scorched by the fire, resulting in excruciating second- and third-degree burns. With enraged fans rioting, thinking the band had left, the entire concert descended into pandemonium. However, only 17 days later, James made a comeback to the stage with a badly bandaged arm. Despite his inability to play the guitar, he continued to stand at the microphone and screamed as though to defy death. It was forever etched in history. Even if he could be killed by fire, James Hetfield would never leave the stage. After the release of the Black Album, it appeared that Metallica would always be at the top, but a period of intense dispute and upheaval was ahead. The band released Load and Reload in 1996 and 1997, respectively. The turn was audacious. Their sound shifted from thrash metal to blues rock and southern rock, which included deeper melodies and slower tempos. The visual change coincided with the change in music. Their signature long hair was chopped short, their outfits were sharp, their jeans were torn, and they even wore eyeliner in promotional pictures. It demonstrated that Metallica was adaptable enough to sell millions of CDs and expand their appeal beyond metal to general audiences. However, for die-hard fans who had loved Kill 'Em All's unadulterated riffs, it was a startling betrayal. Many people made fun of Metallica's death here. Years later, James Hetfield said that he had never been at ease with that portrayal. He was secretly still a traditionalist who hated to deviate too much from his heritage. Although Metallica's sales were still enormous, they had lost some of the thrash soul that made them famous. Then there was a media frenzy. The first well-known band to sue Napster was Metallica in the year 2000. The popular online file-sharing platform for violating copyright. They were right legally. However, in the eyes of young people, the band's reputation as rebellious heroes vanished in an instant. Rather than fighting against the system, they were painted as wealthy millionaires who were hypocritical and avaricious and who were attempting to stifle a free-sharing culture. Their reputation suffered one of the most severe wounds, which persists to this day. The fortress itself was no longer sturdy on the inside. After playing bass for Metallica for 14 years following Cliff Burton's passing, Jason Newsted announced his retirement in 2001. He gave a straightforward but tragic explanation. He was always viewed as an outsider, his creativity suppressed, and he was never permitted to provide suggestions. For a lot of supporters, that was a red flag. Metallica had lost the camaraderie that had sustained them over their most devastating defeats. The release of Saint Anger in 2003 was the real storm. It was a disaster instead of the renaissance that was anticipated. Critics referred to the band's production as their greatest creative failure because of its raw, abrasive sound, lack of guitar solos, and Lars Ulrich's drums that sounded like barrels of oil. A year later, their sense of invincibility was brutally shattered by the debut of the documentary Some Kind of Monster. Fans witnessed the band's shattered core for the first time. Hetfield going into rehab, James and Lars fighting all the time, Kirk Hammett helpless in the middle, and the gang on the verge of disintegration. The movie was humanizing and disturbing at the same time. The insides of metal giants could decay when one's artistic ego and personal scars were exposed. Metallica made it through that gloomy period, but their fame was no longer unchallenged. Additionally, James Hetfield, who previously stood tall in front of tens of thousands of people, had to confront the harsh reality. He was battling not just his bandmates or the crowd, but also the inner demons. James came out of rehab a different person after he had fallen to his lowest point with some sort of monster. He managed to stay sober, learned to face his inner darkness rather than numb it with booze, and spent more time with his family. During that time, he not only salvaged his career but also himself. With their 2008 album Death Magnetic, which was praised as a potent resuscitation, Metallica made a triumphant comeback. Following years of trial and error, they went back to their thrash origins. Razor-sharp riffs, a relentless pace, and lyrics that cut through death, rebirth, and life. Topping charts in over 30 countries, the album was hailed as the real Metallica is back, demonstrating that people who were once deemed to be broken could rise again with the music that gave them life. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame formally honored Metallica a year later, in 2009, establishing their enduring position in the history of popular music. They kept touring the world, and in 2013 they became the first band to play on all 7 continents when they performed in Antarctica for scientists and military who were stationed there. It represented Metallica's unwavering perseverance and was more than just a concert. But the past doesn't completely vanish. Following almost 15 years of abstinence, James Hetfield abruptly relapsed in 2019 and went back to treatment for the second time. He decided to be honest this time rather than conceal it. Metallica cancelled their entire tour of Australia and New Zealand so James could concentrate on getting better. The band prioritized friendship and health over fame and fortune, which would have been unimaginable during their wild days. By portraying James as a human being who was weak and vulnerable yet courageous enough to face it, the alteration won over fans' empathy and made him less of an unbeatable hero. With 72 seasons, a concept album focused on the first 18 years of life, a time that James feels molds the whole person, Metallica made a comeback in 2023. The song's lyrics reflected his troubled upbringing, rage, and internal wounds, but they also captured the tenacious spirit of a survivor. It was more than simply music, it was the first-hand account of a man who had suffered enough to realize that while the past cannot be undone, it can be used to one's advantage. James Hetfield is now considered a rock chieftain and an elder statesman of metal at the age of 60. On stage, he still roars with fury and grit, but offstage, he is quiet and reflective. Hetfield has gone from an orphan youngster holding a guitar for comfort to a legend on the verge of being destroyed by booze and anger. He now serves as evidence that genuine strength is not in never falling but rather in getting back up after every setback and carrying on with the music that keeps him going. James Hetfield was slowly being consumed by drink and wrath during those crisis years until Francesca Tomasi, a lady, came into his life as an unexpected anchor. Behind the scenes, an Argentinian is part of Metallica's touring crew. James was still a wild man who was always holding a bottle of liquor when they first met in the early 1990s. The romance first appeared to be no more than any other brief affair a rock star may have. But the closer they got, the more James noticed that Francesca possessed a steadiness and serenity that he had never seen in anybody else. They got married legally in 1997. It was not only a turning point in James' life, but it was also his first sincere attempt to change his ways and become a family man instead of a drunken outlaw. Despite not being famous or featured on magazine covers, Francesca's patience and simplicity served as a reprieve in James's chaotic life. When things got out of hand, he frequently acknowledged that his wife was the one who drove him into treatment and made him face his addiction. Not only was their marriage based on love, but it also involved James fighting to learn how to control the memories of his early years. Moments of oppressive tension were created in their home as a result of him bringing his rage, his temper, and his outbursts from the stage. According to Francesca, James may be a ticking time bomb, and she had to set a limit since the family wouldn't be able to exist if he didn't change. James had no choice but to select his family because of such toughness. During their blissful years together, they had 3 children: Marcella Francesca Hetfield, born in 2002, Castor Virgil Hetfield, born in 2000 and currently the drummer for the band Bastardines, and Kelly T. Hetfield, born in 1998. It was an entirely new chapter in James's life. He once claimed that seeing Castor practice drums or witnessing his daughter sleep soundly brought him pure delight and served as a reminder to keep sober. In sharp contrast to his fierce persona on stage, James was a loving father who made every effort to be there for his kids. But no marriage is impervious to stress, particularly when the husband is a rock star who is burdened with the debilitating weight of fame and psychological wounds. James and Francesca announced their divorce to the media in 2019, after more than 25 years of marriage. Everyone understood, but the reasons were never made public. There were cracks too deep to heal from the internal struggles, relapses, and never-ending battle with addiction. It was another sort of loss for James. Not as brutal as the stage injuries or as loud as Cliff Burton's death, but a quiet, unrelenting ache more severe than any burn or scar. Many people today still view Francesca as the savior who rescued James Hetfield at his most difficult time. Despite their shattered marriage, he had 3 children from it, 3 shining lights in the otherwise dark life of a metal frontman who had come dangerously close to losing himself on several occasions. Even though James Hetfield's life has long been associated with the image of Metallica's ferocious and explosive frontman, his personal life is full of paradoxes and intensely human emotions. He and the band were derisively called Alcoholica when he was younger, a sour moniker that was accurate because alcohol was essentially Metallica's 5th member and was present at every practice and tour. James experienced episodes of excessive drinking that caused him to lose control, go totally unconscious, and forget his performance and words on stage. He trembled when thinking back on those hazy years, and he acknowledged in later life that he had no recollection of many of them. Not many are aware that Hetfield almost made the transition to Hollywood. He had invitations to try out for the iconic movie series The Terminator in the late 1980s, and there were even rumors that he was considered for the Wolverine role in X-Men. These initiatives demonstrated James' distinct appeal, even though none of them came to fruition. Despite his preference for the guitar over the big screen, fans frequently made jokes about Hetfield being a real-life metal superhero because of his tough physique, intense stare, and snarling voice. James's taste in music was never limited to Metallica. He was an avid admirer of Aerosmith from an early age, citing Steven Tyler and Joe Perry as the primary influences on his decision to pursue rock. Sweet Home Alabama by Lynyrd Skynyrd was the first record he had purchased with his own savings. It was a pure musical remembrance before life threw him into a maelstrom of loud riffs and ceaseless touring. As a reference to his father's construction talents and his unyielding, stubborn personality, James also went by Hammer at school. James was a rocker who also had a craving for adrenaline. His passion was skateboarding. The band almost broke when he broke his arm several times. The management of Metallica offered an ultimatum following multiple postponed performances because of injury. Skating was definitely prohibited for James. He lost that excitement and instead became passionate about building and collecting vintage cars, even selling rare cars at auction to raise money for charitable causes. Though it was restrained by a feeling of societal duty, his rebellious nature persisted here. A James Hetfield who has been molded by adversity. On the other extreme, James discovered tranquility in the natural world. He publicly declared it his personal hobby and spent hours birdwatching and keeping bees. He found that watching a group of migratory birds or sitting calmly by his hives helped him regain his equilibrium after nights of intense concerts and the roar of tens of thousands of spectators. Hetfield saw nature as more than a hobby. It was a spiritual remedy. James made a foray into movies as well. He starred in the 2019 Ted Bundy film, Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile, in which he played a police officer. His performance's organic genuineness startled the audience. Outside of the metal community, he made a notable impression by lending his voice to the animated series Dave the Barbarian and the Skylanders video games. James Hetfield was the essence of Metallica on stage by 2024, and he was also becoming more and more influential in other fields. In 2023, after 72 seasons were a huge success, the band embarked on the gigantic M72 World Tour, which ran from 2023 to 2026. In 2024, Metallica swept across North America, Europe, and Mexico. They made their first trip back to Australia and New Zealand in very long time in 2025. Despite the aging of his voice and physique, James maintained the atmosphere of a renowned frontman night after night. Though he acknowledged that acting wasn't his first passion, Hetfield once again gained recognition in the movie industry, co-starring with Peter Dinklage in The Thicket. His participation nevertheless aroused interest and demonstrated his abilities outside of music. Metallica Saved My Life, a documentary by Jonas Åkerlund that told the stories of fans all over the world, debuted in 2025. Hetfield himself shared his experience of addiction, insecurity, and rehabilitation. For millions of people, Metallica is more than just music, the movie reminded them of that. James kept on his pursuit of social duty in the meanwhile. He and Metallica continued their charity work through the All Within My Hands Foundation, fundraising through the auction of valuable artifacts, particularly during the month of giving in 2025. James also attracted notice with a recent tattoo that honored the man who shaped his life by including Lemmy Kilmister's ashes, Motorhead. Hetfield continued to return to his peaceful retreats in Colorado despite the frantic pace of touring. Observing birds, caring for bees, and working silently in his wood shop. Still hard-edged and dominating on stage, but modest and introspective off-stage, he is the elder statesman of metal in his 60s, living completely in the present while bearing the burden of the past. He is no longer the untamed rebel frontman of old. With more than 125 million albums sold, hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, and dozens of sold-out tours across continents, James Hetfield would already be considered one of the most successful rock musicians in history if one were to look at Metallica solely by their numbers, but his legacy extends well beyond those figures. Hetfield does more than just play forward. By co-founding thrash metal with Lars Ulrich, he turned a once disregarded loud and rough genre into a worldwide cultural phenomenon. For over 40 years, his scathing riffs have shaped the way the guitar is played in metal bands like Kill 'Em All, Master of Puppets, and Death Magnetic. Hetfield has been referred to as their compass for identifying their own strength by younger generations of bands, like Slipknot, Slayer, and Pantera. Metallica brought metal to new heights that Black Sabbath could only imagine, as even legendary musicians like Ozzy Osbourne and Tony Iommi have acknowledged in public. With his demeanor that was half warrior and half leader, Hetfield became the public face of metal. James' impact, however, goes beyond only music. He came to represent internal conflict, having the courage to acknowledge one's own frailties, and falling and rising again. His many rehab stays, his battle with addiction, and his patient hold on recovery have served as an inspiration to innumerable followers who are struggling with their own darkness. No superhuman idol could ever be as real as Hetfield because of his willingness to cry, talk about his lonely history, and acknowledge the unreasonable outbursts of rage in his marriage. James Hetfield is regarded as a senior rock personality and an elder statesman in popular culture. Innumerable rock culture documentaries have featured him, and he has voiced charitable commercials and starred in movies. For millions, Hetfield represents the voice of disobedient youth and is more than just a singer. An example of perseverance and tangible evidence that an artist can face their own pains. Following over 40 years at the top, James Hetfield has left his mark on heavy metal history in the memories of future generations of fans. Teenagers' beds, office workers' headphones, and enormous stadiums are still filled with his music. Furthermore, even though those songs frequently contain angry and resentful overtones, they are fundamentally declarations. Music may provide light even when the darkness consumes you. Under the limelight, James Hetfield, who has dedicated almost half of his life to Metallica, is a living icon and a reminder of the frailty of people. He struggled with addiction, anger, family loss, and a shattered upbringing, yet he overcame all of this to continue to fuel the flame of music. From air-ripping riffs to somber, hoarse vocals, Hetfield transformed anger into a force that unites millions of people. The question still stands, though. To what extent did he sacrifice his personal life for the limelight? What was the number of wounds he took? Injuries that might never fully recover in order to achieve immortality? James Hetfield is a painfully, profoundly genuine legend, and his enduring force may be defined by that very battle. What about you? In your opinion, what is James Hetfield's most significant legacy? The timeless Metallica songs? Or the tale of a guy who courageously confronted the dark in order to rediscover the light? Please leave a comment with your ideas, and remember to follow the channel to keep the metal flame burning brightly.